Times I've been in the audience for these teach-ins and they've been wonderful. But a few times the same question has been asked, and it's why do people get so emotional about changing a name? So I decided to look into that and think about it. So what's in a name? So a child is born given a first name. The family name will be the child's last name. This name identifies the child. She's born in Fort Bragg. The name Fort Bragg identifies that place. So the purpose of a name is to identify. It separates this one from that one. And over time, identification can become identity. We could have the sense consciously or unconsciously that we are that name. So she goes to school, the school has a name. Often many generations have played for the same school on the same court or field. Names on gravestones mark where our loved ones are buried. And so over a lifetime, these bonds are strengthened, and certainly over generations, they're strengthened. Her school has clubs and teams. There are professional teams, mascots, colors, emblems, rivalries, challenges, championships, trophies, and stories. So many stories with so many names. We have our country, our flag, our mascot, our colors, our allies, our enemies. There's war. People risk their lives for this name of their country because that name holds everything they hold dear. This naming and bonding process is a human process, and it's also true for the enemy. So I looked into two different kinds. It seems to me that unnaming can be done in two different ways. And so there's forced unnaming and chosen unnaming. So I wanted to give some examples of forced unnaming. History shows that victories of war write the history of events, while the voices of the defeated are demeaned, or worse, silenced. Control of the narrative, erasure of peoples through an incomplete, biased history, is a forced and extensive form of unnaming. So another form of forced unnaming of huge populations is mass sterilization, eugenics, genocide. So we're talking about the attempt to erase or unname a whole population because of race or religion or some other affiliation. At first, the Nazis deported Jews without passports, taking away legal identification, their place, their civil rights, and left them stateless and essentially unnamed. Later, Nazis forced Jews into concentration camps to exterminate them completely. For identification, each prisoner had a number tattooed to their arm. Animals, especially horses and cattle, were and are branded with a ranch logo to identify the animal as the owner's property. I don't think the animals asked to be branded, so that's a form of forced unnaming. Beginning in 1619, slaves were stolen or bought from West African tribes, separated from their families, members of their tribe, from anyone with the same language. They were given the last name of their slave masters as a means of identifying them as the slaveholder's property. Upon arrival to the American prison industry, prisoners are assigned a letter and a long number to identify them. To forcibly remove a person's name is to take away their individuality, their identity, and their personhood. And just a really quick dive into the art of the power of subtle unnaming. Prisoners used to be referred to as inmates, but now our prison system refers to them as incarcerated individuals. So there's a distancing with language that can happen, and that often happens with authoritarian governments or colonialism, imperialism. In the 1840s, California law stated that any Indian caught stealing anything could be punished the same as a horse thief. Horse thieves were shot, according to the law. Obviously, Indians were not only not protected by the law threatened their lives. The gold rush drastically changed the demographics of Northern California. Consequently, the rates of kidnappings, forced slave labor, rape, murder, and wholesale massacres increased. And on January 6, 1851, in his State of the State address, the first governor of California, Peter Burnett, declared that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct, must be expected. I had to read that sentence over about 5 times. And the State of the State address is like, it goes on for pages. I don't know how long it took him to, I don't know whether they gave a speech in public, it must have taken hours, but at any rate, so what with starvation, exposure, and disease, and aggressions from vigilantes, state militia, and the US military, the population shift of the first peoples of California decreased to such an extent that it can be called genocide, according to the terms of the 1940 United Nations Convention on Genocide. Although exact figures are impossible, historian Benjamin Madley, in his book Genocide, estimates between 1846 and 1870, the population of the Californian Indian had declined by 4/5. That means after 24 years, only 1/5 of the population remained in 1870. It's just amazing. So, I wanted to say something about moving Native American Indians, indigenous people from their place. Because the places they had lived seasonally for millennia is quite different than us moving to another place. Their place was all nature, their habitat. It was sacred. It gave them understandings of survival skills, customs, rituals, myths, and stories, because it was a spiritual survival give-and-take wisdom where all relations were deeply integrated and profoundly interconnected. So these facts are not taught in American Californian or Fort Bragg history is a clear form of forced unnaming. And were it not for the oral tradition of indigenous people around the entire world, entire languages, cultures, and wisdoms would have been silenced forever. And I have to say that the indigenous wisdoms are greatly needed today. Let me just say it that way. I think our world would really do well to listen to their wisdoms, their sense of cosmology and survival and interconnection. So these are general examples of forced unnaming, and they're tried and true methods of colonization, especially controlling the narratives of the story. So let's look at choosing to unname. In a patriarchy, it's common for a woman to change her maiden name and assume the last name of her husband after marriage. So depending on the intentions, this could symbolize her willing devotion to union with her husband's life for the rest of their lives. Or it could be seen as her being his property. Some artists and entertainers choose to change their names for professional reasons. Nuns and monks often change their names to willingly let go of their past identities and take a name closer associated to a saint or saintly qualities with the intention to further their single-minded focus on their devotion to and union with God. When the slave economy of the South was threatened by rising sentiments of Northern abolitionists, the Southern states separated from the United States of America, calling their union the Confederacy. So, in general, we can see that changing a name, choosing to change your name, is one means of separating from a former identity and identifying with another. So, change our name is choosing to advocate changing the name of Fort Bragg through consensus and community. I find that so inspiring because, as you can see from a lot of these histories, names were given because one person in power said, this is the name, and it's been the name forever, or not. We recognize many various opinions regarding this name change. We're advocating further learning from ourselves on the history of Fort Bragg, the history of colonization, the history of slavery, the history of Native Americans, specifically the tribes of our region, past and present racism, the fort, and Braxton Bragg himself, to encourage our community to rethink what it is we wish to identify with. The names of American military forts have been changed lately through a chain of command, and this, again, depends ultimately on one man's decision. Some names have been changed through city councils. In one presentation, Grace Maria Eberhard showed us how the name of the Slater Museum of Natural History was changed at her University of Puget Sound because of her and a good friend who were activists and students of what were
eugenicists.
Okay. Biology ethics or something like that. And she studied eugenics. So with her friend and dedicated research, a name change committee, the university president finally came on board, and eventually the board of directors decided. It took a while, and they had to really go at it. She got grants for her research. She really worked hard. As a member of Change Our Name group, I personally do not wish to keep the name decided by one white man, to honor a white slaveholder, and a fort created to sequester the Native Americans of this place and ultimately remove them. It's healthy for us to learn about ourselves and our history, local, national, global, and decide as a community. This would not be an unasked for unnaming, but a chosen unnaming to identify with the present values we hold. And we advocate this change to bring to light the facts of our history and acknowledge the harms of the past. And rather than silence the first peoples of this place, we honor their presence with honesty and respect and listen to them. We'd be avowing the scientifically proven fact that diversity assures resilience of any community and habitat. And in spite of our past history, we wish to make the name of the place where we live a truthful rendering that welcomes all. Thank you.